The message arrived while I was busy serving customers in my boutique, on a busy Friday afternoon as usual. I glanced at my phone screen while maintaining a professional smile, helping Mrs. Thompson choose a scarf to match her new dress. She was one of my most loyal customers, someone who trusted the taste I had carefully cultivated over the years. My eyes lingered on the message for only a split second, but the words were seared into my brain, colder than the December air outside the glass door. I'm leaving you and moving to Los Angeles with my 20-year-old girlfriend. Oh, and I've already drained our joint bank account. Ha ha ha. There was no apology, no trace of hesitation, just a brazen declaration, delivered in a single text message, as light as a notice of a change of location. Next to the word ha-ha was a mocking smiley face, a knife that stabbed deep into my self-esteem. If this was how Ryan Carter chose to end his 12-year marriage, I didn't bother holding back a moment of weakness. I didn't shake my hand as I put the phone down on the counter, nor did I change my tone as I continued to talk to Mrs. Thompson, suggesting a scarf in a warmer shade to match her skin tone. From the outside, it would seem that nothing special happened in that moment, that I was just going about my business like any other day. But in fact, that was the moment my marriage officially ended. Not in a heated argument, not with divorce papers neatly placed on the kitchen table, but with a cheap text message sent in seconds. Ryan had chosen to leave me in the most insensitive, cold, and mean way possible. But I wasn't surprised. The truth was that I knew. Not because of some vague premonition of a betrayed wife, but because the signs had been there all along, as clear as cracks in glass that, once you noticed them, you couldn't pretend they weren't there. I saw them late at night, when he said he was busy at work but the bank account hadn't added a penny. I saw it in the sudden change of his phone password after a year of neglecting security. I saw it in his increased interest in the gym, in new clothes, in his hyper-preservation of his image. Not for health or work, but for something else. 3 months ago, I found a receipt for dinner at a fancy restaurant in Chicago, the night he said he had to work late. 2 courses, 2 glasses of fine red wine, and a red rose were placed on the table, delicate but revealing. I didn't cry that night. I didn't confront him. I just quietly opened a separate bank account and began preparing for the day I knew would come. A week later, when Ryan suggested consolidating our accounts to simplify things, I nodded happily, while my savings were transferred to safer places. I continued to play the role of a trusting wife, patiently collecting every trace he left. The joint account he had just emptied? I had cleverly left enough money so he wouldn't suspect anything, while still making regular deposits to maintain my cover. I had it all figured out. Except for one thing. I hadn't expected Ryan to be so cheap that a text message would end it all. My phone rang again. "Don't waste your time begging. I'm leaving tomorrow. I'll send my stuff later." Did he really think I would hold on? That I would cry, beg him to stay? I wasn't that kind of woman. Never. I put the phone down, careful to keep my breathing even, my movements as precise as ever. I wrapped the scarf in a gift box, tied it with a red ribbon, and smiled at Mrs. Thompson as I handed it to her. My store, which Ryan had despised, which he had once derided as an expensive hobby, had been running smoothly with or without him. While he was preparing to start a new life with some young mistress, I was standing there, as steady as ever. I stepped behind the counter, picked up the phone again, and typed a single text. Good luck. I imagined Ryan smugly thinking he had won, believing I would collapse in grief at losing my husband, my money, my everything. Little did he know that, while he thought he had everything under control, I had been a game ahead of him. Now he could enjoy his small victory. I would not take anything from him. Because all that mattered, I kept to myself. I put the phone down on the counter, still smiling professionally as I said goodbye to Mrs. Thompson. The doorbell rang as she left, leaving the store in a brief silence before another customer walked in. I adjusted a handbag on the display, giving myself a few seconds to collect my thoughts. Ryan thought I would be surprised. He expected the text to come as a shock, to leave me disoriented, panicked, heartbroken. But the truth was, I had been preparing for this day. not in a hasty, emotional outburst. I had spent months putting things together, carefully and deliberately. I hadn't planned to leave him, but I hadn't allowed myself to be a victim either. The signs had been there for a long time, and I saw them clearly, piece by piece, slowly piecing them together like a puzzle, and with enough patience, the truth would reveal itself. 3 months ago, when I stumbled across a restaurant bill on my credit card statement, I didn't confront Ryan right away. I'm not the type of woman who gets into a pointless argument, only to be distracted by slick excuses. Instead, I quietly opened a separate bank account the next morning. I chose a different bank, one that wasn't linked to any of the accounts we'd shared, and I transferred all of my personal savings into it. Ryan had no idea, because I'd always been financially independent. I earned my own money, I managed my own money, and I'd never put my entire life in the hands of a man, not even my husband. When he suggested merging our bank accounts just a week later, I smiled and agreed without a shred of doubt. I even made sure he saw me transfer a certain amount of money into our joint account every month, giving him a sense of security, making him believe that I was still trusting and faithful to our arrangement. He thought he was controlling, but in reality, I was just giving him enough rope to tie himself up. I started tracking Ryan's spending meticulously. Every transaction on our credit cards was carefully recorded in a spreadsheet that I kept on a separate hard drive, not synced to any other device. Every time there was a suspicious transaction, a dinner at an expensive restaurant, a hotel reservation, or a luxury gift that never showed up at the house, I wrote it down. I didn't have to ask or be suspicious anymore because the numbers never lied. Ryan thought he was smart enough to hide everything, but he forgot that I was the only one of us with financial skills. He may be a clumsy liar, but I have a way of making sure that all the evidence speaks for itself. I have also made sure that my most important asset, this boutique, has nothing to do with our joint finances. Since opening the store, I have invested it myself, using money I saved before we got married. I never let Ryan contribute capital, never allowed him to interfere with the business, even though he had suggested many times that he could assist me in managing it. The legal documents, the lease, the business license, all were in my name, not a single line related to him. I remember Ryan's annoyance, telling me that I was too independent, that I didn't believe in marriage if I didn't share everything. I remember his words that seemed caring but were actually disguised attempts at control. But I stood my ground, and now that he has deliberately drained our joint accounts, he will soon realize that this store is not something he can touch. For the past 2 months, I have carefully maintained the facade of an unsuspecting wife, but I have not stopped gathering evidence. I kept track of every ambiguous text Ryan sent, every unwarranted transaction, every small but suspicious gesture. When he started spending more, I knew he was further along in his scheme. When he changed his phone password for the 3rd time in a month, I knew there was someone else in the picture. And when he started spending weekends on business trips that his company had no mention of, I knew this day would come sooner than I expected. And it did. He chose to leave when he thought I would be most helpless, on the weekend when my store was busiest, at the moment when I couldn't leave to confront him right away. But that proved that he never really knew me. I'm not the type to act on impulse, not the type to ruin a business just because a man decided to cheat. Ryan may think he's winning this game, but the truth is he's never had the upper hand. I pick up the phone, open my contacts, and dial the number of the lawyer I consulted 2 months ago, when I realized things were irreparable. I have the evidence in hand, ready for whatever comes next. Ryan thinks he's taken all my money, but what he doesn't know is that my real assets have never been under his control. He just moved out. Good. The paperwork is ready. I'll file tomorrow morning. I don't need to rush. I let him enjoy his false victory, let him believe he's succeeded. But soon enough he'll realize that he's standing on thin ice, and I'm the only one who knows when that ice will crumble beneath his feet. I put the phone down after the call with my lawyer, my eyes still glued to the screen as another message from Ryan popped up. I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. Little shop? I almost laughed at his naivety. A man who had just destroyed his entire financial foundation was trying to console me with such pathetic arrogance. My shop wasn't just a hobby, as he called it. It was my real asset, something I'd built from scratch, a source of income that far exceeded his salary but had never been taken seriously. I'd always made sure it was out of Ryan's reach, and now that he thought he'd won, that he'd walked away with all the money in the joint account, he'd soon realize that he had nothing. I double-checked all the documents before sending them to my lawyer. Bank records with every suspicious transaction logged in detail. Credit card statements showing hotel and restaurant expenses. Text messages admitting to draining the joint account, and especially the last text he had just sent. Clear evidence of his contempt and calculation. I opened my banking app, checking one last time the joint account that Ryan had drained. Everything was going according to plan. When I agreed to merge the accounts, I had deliberately left enough money behind to keep him from becoming suspicious, but never enough to hurt me. While he thought he had gotten away with everything, in reality, I had been in complete control all along. I called the credit card company. I need to report the fraudulent transactions. My tone was calm but firm. 2 first-class tickets to Los Angeles, a hotel reservation at the Beverly Grand. I have a text from my ex admitting that he used our joint card to pay for these after draining our bank accounts. The satisfaction in the credit officer's voice was almost palpable as she confirmed that the entire transaction would be canceled immediately. I pressed send to take a screenshot of Ryan's text message as proof, then slowly put the phone down. Tomorrow, Ryan would arrive at the airport with his mistress only to find out that their tickets were no longer valid. They would arrive at the fancy hotel only to be denied a room. And in the meantime, the formal complaint would be filed in court. The next morning, I woke up to a series of text messages from Ryan. "What did you do with the credit card? The airline denied our tickets. The hotel canceled the reservation." I smiled, put my phone away, and continued my work as usual. It was a busy day at the store, and I didn't have time to waste on the panic attacks of a man who had just gotten himself into trouble. That afternoon, my lawyer sent me an update. An emergency hearing has been scheduled for Monday. We have enough evidence to freeze all of his remaining assets. I wasn't surprised. What I gathered was enough to prove that Ryan had deliberately emptied the joint account and used the money for personal purposes, without leaving any for me. An act that would not be taken lightly by the court. My lawsuit was not only for a fair division of assets, but also for the full recovery of all the money he had taken. And with all the financial documents I had carefully prepared, I knew that his lawyer would not be able to find any loopholes to overturn the situation. On Monday, I walked into the courthouse with absolute confidence. Ryan was there, sitting next to his lawyer, looking none of the arrogant as he had in the text messages he had sent a few days earlier. He was wearing a suit that looked a little shabby, perhaps because he had run out of money for new clothes. His mistress was absent, a clear sign that his new life was not as romantic as he had imagined. My lawyer opened the file, laying out each piece of evidence in a tight, systematic manner. Ryan's proud text messages about emptying his bank account, the canceled hotel reservations, the unusual credit card spending history. I watched Ryan sink deeper into his chair as each document was presented, each lie exposed before the judge. When his lawyer tried to argue that I had targeted revenge, my lawyer simply replied, "My client protected his legitimate assets." We don't call that revenge. We call that wisdom. The judge reviewed the papers. They were all on my side. The court ordered that all of Ryan's personal accounts be frozen until the money he had withdrawn was repaid. His fraudulent spending was treated as a misappropriation of community property, and instead of taking half of what I had, he was forced to repay the money he had taken, a sum I knew he had no way of coming up with. When the judge asked Ryan about the money, he stammered, "But it's all gone." A cold look from the judge silenced him. "Then that's your problem." The hearing ended, and I walked out of the courthouse, feeling the sun on my face. I had won. Ryan had nothing. No money, no home, no job. My business was still thriving, and he was left penniless, trapped in his own mistakes. And as I walked away, not looking back, I knew that my life was now completely separated from him. Forever. I walked out of the courthouse, leaving behind a man who believed he could knock me out with a text message. There was no remorse in my heart, no sense of regret or loss. There was only relief, a sense of lightness that I was finally free of unnecessary constraints. As I walked away, Ryan sat there, staring into space as if he couldn't believe things had turned out this way. But that was only the beginning of the real fallout. I didn't have to wait long to see the consequences of Ryan's choices. Just days after the hearing, news began to spread within his company about his financial fraud, using a joint credit card to finance an escape with his mistress. I didn't have to do anything. The rumors spread faster than any evidence I could present. His coworkers began to ask questions, and when HR received a complaint from me with clear evidence of irregular spending, they couldn't ignore it. An internal investigation was launched, and soon Ryan was officially notified that the company was reviewing his position. Gone were the days of walking into the office in expensive suits and cocky smiles, of bragging about his new life of freedom at lunch. Instead, he faced questions, contemptuous looks from his colleagues, and a reputation that he could never recover from. But that was only the beginning of the nightmare. After his accounts were frozen and a lawsuit filed, Ryan found himself without enough money to maintain the lifestyle he had imagined he would have after leaving me. His bills were garnished, his credit cards were canceled, and his reckless spending quickly turned into unpayable debt. I didn't have to do anything more, because his own carelessness had put him in a hole from which he could never climb out. I heard from mutual acquaintances that Ryan had tried to negotiate with the company, tried to convince them that it was all a misunderstanding, that I had trapped him, that I had gamed the system to make him lose everything. But no one believed him. The messages he had sent me, the taunts, the boasts about emptying the account, said it all. And then, on a Friday afternoon, just a week after losing control of his finances, he lost his job. I felt no pity when I heard the news. I remembered how he had mocked my work, said that the boutique was a small project, that I should have been less obsessed with keeping my finances separate, that I should have trusted him more. And now, the very caution he had disregarded had protected me, while his arrogance and carelessness had destroyed everything he had. With no job left, Ryan was forced to face the reality that he could no longer sustain anything. The luxury apartment he had rented with his mistress quickly became a burden he could not afford. And then, just as I had predicted, Hannah, the young woman he had left me for, began to realize that life with a middle-aged, unemployed, and penniless man was not at all the romantic vision she had imagined. She stopped posting pictures of her new life on social media, stopped making sarcastic insinuations about women who don't know how to keep their husbands. The fancy dinners disappeared. The trips were canceled. The secret trysts in high-end hotels were reduced to a small apartment whose rent was due and neither of them could afford. I heard from friends that Hannah had begun to complain to her coworkers that she had been cheated on, that she had no idea it would turn out like this. And then, one weekend, she left. No goodbyes, no regrets, just packing up and disappearing, leaving Ryan alone with the mess he had made. But Ryan's biggest blow wasn't the loss of his young lover, or the job he had once been so proud of. It came from his family, the people who had initially stood by him, the people who had called me ruthless when I wouldn't let him take a piece of my fortune. I didn't have to do anything. They saw the truth for themselves. They saw the messages he sent, heard about his attempts to claim a piece of my business he had never contributed to. They watched him fall, unable to fend for himself. And then, one by one, they abandoned him. His sister, Jessica, was the first to cut off contact. She couldn't accept that Ryan had used me for so long, then destroyed himself thinking he could easily shake off the past. "I can't believe I ever trusted him," she told a mutual friend, and then no one ever heard her mention him again. His mother, who had blamed me for not forgiving, finally caught on. She called me one afternoon, her voice more tired than ever. "He still doesn't get it," she said. "He still thinks it's your fault, the company's fault, the legal system's fault. He refuses to see that he got himself into this." I had nothing to say to her because it didn't matter to me anymore. His family might regret it, might turn their backs on him, but that wasn't my problem. Ryan had finally lost everything he'd taken for granted. No more job, No more money. No more people around him. I heard he had moved back in with his parents, a 45-year-old man back in his childhood bedroom, stuck in a past he had destroyed. While I moved forward, expanding my business, building the life I deserved, Ryan was left with only memories of a life he had lost. And I didn't have to do anything. I just stood by, watching him fall apart, step by step. Ryan went back to his childhood bedroom, stuck in a life he had destroyed, and I moved forward. Nothing changed the way he expected. I didn't fall apart, I didn't become destroyed. I didn't lose control of my life like he had imagined when he left me. On the contrary, I thrived more than ever. My boutique, which he had once dismissed as a small project, a frivolous hobby, was now booming at a pace that even I had not expected. At first, it was just a natural effect. As my story spread through the community, as women around me heard about how I stood up for myself, how I faced betrayal without weakening or breaking down, they began to come to the store not just to shop, but to show their support. Every day I met women who came in, not simply as customers, but as people who sympathized with my story. Some whispered words of encouragement as they paid their bills. Some shared their own stories. Failed marriages, men who tried to control them, times when they were underestimated just because they dared to stand up for their independence. The boutique already had a steady stream of customers, but now it became a symbol. I wasn't just selling clothes or handbags anymore. I was selling an idea that women could build their own lives without relying on anyone, without fear of financial independence. Sales skyrocketed, far beyond anything I'd ever predicted. Local papers started to take notice of me, not as a betrayed wife, but as a visionary businesswoman. A small business magazine ran a story about how I protected my assets, how I kept my personal and business finances separate from the start. A principle I'd always believed in but never thought could become an inspirational story. And then, from that small article, the story spread. I got an interview from a big fashion magazine, then a TV show about women and entrepreneurship wanted me to share my experience. I never thought that one day I would be standing on stage speaking in front of hundreds of people, but it happened. A women's business conference invited me to be a speaker, and the topic wasn't divorce or infidelity, but building and protecting a successful business. I stepped up to the podium, looked at the faces listening intently, and I realized that my story wasn't just about revenge or winning against a man who had underestimated me. It was bigger than that. It was about taking control of my life, about not letting someone dictate my future just because they thought they could. The second boutique opened exactly a year after I received Ryan's farewell message. This time, I didn't just expand. I expanded my vision. I hired more staff, invested in e-commerce, and turned my brand into an influential name. I collaborated with emerging designers, giving the store a unique style that couldn't be found anywhere else. The women who had come to me for comfort now returned as loyal customers, not just because of my story, but because they truly loved what I created. 2 years later, I opened a third store, this time in a larger city. The media continued to follow my progress, and I began to be known as an icon for financial independence for women. Young women came to me for advice, not just about business, but about how to protect themselves in a world where women were often undervalued. I realized that my success was not measured by my sales or the number of stores I opened, but by the number of women I inspired. Ryan was no longer a name in my life, but I heard that he was still struggling to find his place. His old job was cut when the company restructured, and no one was willing to hire a man with a tumultuous financial past and a disreputable reputation. He tried dating apps, but few were interested in a middle-aged man who still lived with his parents. Younger women, the ones he thought would always be available to him, heard about his past through office gossip. And Hannah, his ex-lover, ironically became a regular at my first boutique. One day, she walked in, no longer the proud young woman who had entered Ryan's life, but a woman who had learned her lesson. She held a handbag in her hand, looking at me hesitantly. "You inspire me," she said, her voice small but firm. "You showed me how a woman can build something lasting on her own, instead of just listening to empty promises." I no longer hold any feelings for the past. I've come too far to look back. But I still keep one thing from those days: Ryan's breakup text, framed and hanging in my office, not as a reminder of the pain, but as proof of how far I've come. Right below it, I hang a plaque that reads, "Success is the best revenge." 3 years ago, I received an insensitive breakup text from the man I'd been with for 12 years. Today, I stand on stage at a national business conference, in front of hundreds of women, sharing my journey, not as a betrayed wife, but as a successful businesswoman who turned a challenge into an opportunity and built an empire of her own. There was applause as I walked to the podium, the lights reflecting off my brand logo, a symbol of resilience and independence. I smiled, looking out at the room, filled with women like me. Women who were looking for a way to protect themselves from the mistakes, the hurts, and the traps that society often sets for them. I began my story, unvarnished, undramatic. I told them that I used to believe in sharing, that a marriage was about two people building things together. But what I learned in this life is that no one can truly protect you but yourself. Trust is necessary, but preparation is more important. I prepared, not because I expected betrayal, but because I understood that anyone, no matter who they are, can change. And I was right. I told her about the separate bank account I had opened, about how I had kept my personal and business finances separate, about how I had carefully collected evidence to protect myself when the time came. In the crowd, I saw nods, knowing glances, women who had either been through the same thing or were trying to avoid it. I saw myself in them, in the worries they tried to hide behind their formal attire. I remembered myself 3 years ago, standing in my boutique, reading Ryan's text messages without showing any emotion. I didn't fall then, and I won't let myself fall later. I don't take revenge with hatred. I don't waste time dwelling on why or what went wrong. I simply keep moving forward, more carefully, smarter, stronger. My success is not an accident. It is the result of careful preparation and the ability to control the situation. My first boutique is now a luxury chain, with 5 branches nationwide and a thriving e-commerce platform. I don't just sell fashion, I sell an idea: that women have the right to control their lives, the right to build a career without sacrificing their independence for anyone. Young entrepreneurs come to me for advice, not only about business, but about how to protect their assets, how to plan for the future without putting everything in the hands of someone else. I taught them about the importance of understanding contracts, of maintaining financial ownership, of never letting emotions get in the way of important decisions. I remembered the times Ryan had mocked me for being so cautious. He had told me I didn't believe in love, that I was too materialistic for refusing to merge the store's finances with our joint accounts. But if I hadn't done that, today would be very different. I would have lost everything. I would have become one of those women I've met who were left with nothing after spending their lives trusting the wrong person. But I didn't let that happen. I wasn't the woman who fell apart when betrayed. I was the woman who walked away with my head held high, because I was prepared for anything. Ryan never understood that. I heard he was still struggling to find his footing in life. His new job never lasted more than a few months, as it became clear to everyone that he was no longer the man he thought he was. The young women he had once pursued were now more wary, as stories about him spread. The doors he thought would always be open to him were now closed. As for me, I didn't care anymore. My life was headed in a completely different direction, one I never thought I would. But now I couldn't imagine a better reality. The conference ended, and I walked out of the room, where women were approaching me, wanting to know more about my story, how they could learn from what I had been through. A young woman stood before me, her eyes filled with concern. My husband says I'm being paranoid by keeping my personal finances and my business separate. He says marriage is about sharing everything, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I looked at her, seeing myself there, 3 years ago, when I had made the same decision. I smiled, softly but firmly. My ex-husband said the same thing, I replied, until he tried to claim half my business in the divorce. I walked out of the hall, the afternoon sun illuminating the road ahead. There were no regrets, no turning back. I had learned the most important lesson of my life, and I shared it with others. My success wasn't just about money or fame, it was about control. I took control of my future when Ryan thought he could control mine. I protected myself when he thought I would fall. And when I looked at my office, where the framed photo with Ryan's old message, "Enjoy your little shop," still hung, I knew I had won. Below that message, I had added a new plaque. The letters were bold, clear, and weighty. "Success is the best revenge."